Let me start first by just talking about business in general. Running a business is a difficult task because businesses are multidimensional. Employees, customers, finance, operations, regulators, et cetera, et cetera. You need to, as a leader, you need to learn how to coordinate and align all those things and provide focus for all those items in order to make a difference in the marketplace, and in order to appeal to customers, and in order to generate revenues and have extra money left over to invest in future improvements. Running a business for a long term is difficult, though. Small businesses struggle with it, and large businesses struggle with it. If you're a small company, the average age of, or 50% of small companies fail by year 5. 70% will fail by year 10. If you're a larger organization, don't take comfort in your size. The average age of the typical S&P 500 company is now under 20 years, and it used to be at about 60 years in the 1950s. So sustainable competitive advantage is becoming more and more elusive, and I'll say a few more words about that. If you want to run a good organization for a long period of time, it requires good business acumen, which is what this class is about. Business savvy, business sense. It's a keenness, a quickness, and understanding a situation, and then making decisions that take and lead you to a better outcome. That's Wikipedia's definition of business acumen, and I'll stand by that. Peter Drucker, you'll hear him a few times during this class, known as the father of corporate strategy, the grandfather of management theory, was a lecturer, was a consultant, has a great quote. The quote goes, "Only 3 things happen naturally in organizations." And this is large organizations or small organizations. 3 things happen naturally: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Your job as a leader within a business, large or small, your job as a leader within your office or within your branch is to make your business, your organization, behave unnaturally. You're there to reduce the friction, overcome the confusion, and to drive outstanding performance. That's really the role of a leader in a business. There's an economist called Thomas Friedman. 2015, he wrote a book called Thank You for Being Late. In Thank You for Being Late, Thomas Friedman talks about change that's occurring in the world and the acceleration of change that's occurring in the world, and how change and acceleration of change is having an impact on society and on businesses and on individuals. In the story, or in the book, Thank You for Being Late, Mr. Friedman tells a story about a king that is so happy with the inventor of the game of chess that the king offers the inventor any reward that the inventor would like to have. And so the inventor says, "Well, king, I'd like to have enough food to feed my family." The king says, "How much food is that?" The inventor thinks about it and says, "Well, king, if you could take the chessboard that I just invented, if you could put 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, if you could then add double that amount of rice on the second square, and then double it again on the third square through all 64 squares of the chessboard, that's what I'd like." So 1 grain of rice on number 1, then 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. If you did that, how many grains of rice would there be up in the upper left-hand corner on the 64th square of that chessboard? Got your number? How many people had 9.2 quintillion? All right, 9.2 quintillion just on that square. Quintillion is a number followed by 18 zeros. The entire chessboard has 18 quintillion grains of rice. What is that process known as when you go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8? All right, it's known as exponential growth. Where have you heard about exponential growth? Well, if you're paying attention, you hear about it with coronavirus and pandemics. But if you've also heard about it before coronavirus, you may have heard about it when we talk about computers, and we talk about computer processing power, and we talk about the ability of computers to store data. Back in the 1960s, Robert Moore came up with what is known as Moore's Law. What Moore's Law said, and it starts back in the 1960s, is that computers would have exponential growth in terms of their processing power and in terms of their ability to store data. All right? Well, when you have exponential growth with grains of rice, you create a mess. When you have exponential growth with something like processing power and the ability to store data, you all of a sudden have strange things starting to occur. You have strange things like driverless cars. You have strange things like these devices, a smartphone that has millions of times more processing power on it than NASA had in total when they put a man on the moon back in the late 1960s. Strange things like a social media platform that can interconnect 3 to 4 billion people instantaneously worldwide. All right? Strange things are starting to occur. As a leader of an organization in the year 2020 and beyond, you're going to have to deal with strange things occurring more and more frequently. Go back to Drucker's quote, organizations behaving naturally, friction, confusion, underperformance. That was true 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, probably when it was first said. Think of the confusion, the friction, and the underperformance that are going to be in your world of leadership, in your environment of leadership, with all the strange things that are occurring and with all the change that's occurring. If you've heard of the term VUCA, VUCA is simply what we're talking about. It's the concept, it's the fact that our environments are becoming much more volatile, much more uncertain, much more complex, and much more ambiguous. And the leadership practices that made successful leaders in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and even in the 2010s, those best practices of leadership, some are still going to apply, but now we're going to have to start to develop VUCA approaches to leadership. And managing and leading in a VUCA world is going to be different than managing and leading in a world that perhaps is not undergoing quite as much change as you're going to see as a leader in your organization. And then here's a nice chart, not nice for everybody, but if companies behave naturally, if leadership fails, this is the typical trajectory. This was a study done of 700 businesses. At the beginning of the study, they took the top 50% of the businesses, or about 350 businesses, as measured on profitability, return on investment, something like return on assets, return on equity. We plotted the best performing companies together as a group over 10 years. We plotted the worst performing companies as a group on the red line over 10 years, and we then compared them at the end of 10 years. And what this data suggests is that the likelihood that if you're running a great company in 2020, that you'll still have a great company in 2030, it doesn't happen on average. On average, the best organizations decline in performance. On average, the worst organizations improve in performance over time, or they go bust altogether. And at the end of 10 years, you're going to have a whole new set of leaders and laggards.